Hello and welcome back to the Eau Rouge Podcast, and the 2021 season is just not letting up. We have another fantastic race to talk about, a really good way to end, I suppose, the first half of the season to take us into the break that Formula One has now for the summer. But also it means we're desperate for another race to keep coming. And well, it's actually quite difficult to know where to start with this one, Chris, because this is my favorite race of the season so far, personally. But I think that there's lots of things that we can talk about because they're so important in what happened, not just in the race, but for the championship as well. But I guess let's start with the unexpected winner of the Hungarian Grand Prix. It's Esteban Ocon. Alpine are really kind of all over the place this season. Obviously, he got a bit of luck today with what happened at the first corner at the beginning of the race, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I don't want to take anything away from him because it seems like it's so easy when you're out in front and you're controlling a race, but it's really not, especially when you've never done it before, like Ocon in Formula One. So he drove a very, very good race, didn't he?
Yes, I think on that point, you're right. Look at Lance Stroll in Turkey last year, a guy who had a better weekend. He was leading that Turkish Grand Prix on merit, but he didn't quite have the composure, although it was very wet, to stay ahead. For Ocon to inherit the place was sheer luck, but for him to hold off a four-time world champion in an equally good, if not possibly better car, really shows why he was so highly rated by Mercedes.
I actually said to you during the race that there was a time a few years ago, before George Russell's time really, where it looked like Ocon was going to be the one taking that second Mercedes seat, and that they wouldn't renew Bottas's contract. Obviously, Bottas did a good job for them in those seasons, so they didn't go for Ocon in the end. And since then, he's floundering is maybe the wrong word. That's too strong of a word, but he's not exactly been like pushing forward this wonder kid kind of narrative that maybe we have seen from the likes of Russell and others. So it's important for him to be in a stable team, which he is in with Alpine now. I think he's going to be there for quite some time. French driver, French team. And also now the fact that he's got that first win under his belt. I know he had a podium last year, but it says a lot about him, I still think, and the car as well. Alpine, despite their very inconsistent performances, seems like they've been very kind of overall have been slowly kind of incrementally improving.
Yes. Yeah. The weird thing is, 1 minute they have a really good result, and the next minute they look a bit nowhere, and then suddenly they look like they're back on the pace again. If you look at Ocon's results this year, 13th, 9th, 7th, 9th, 9th retired, 14th, 14th retired, 9th, and then a win. And much the same, really, for Alonso, retired 10th, 8th, 17th, 13th, 6th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 7th, and then 4th. So that inconsistency makes it quite exciting. And it made us question, I think, certainly me, if the car was going to be able to hold on. Luckily, of course, Valtteri Bottas managed to remove nearly every single front-running car, with the exception of Lewis Hamilton, which did make it somewhat easier. But let's absolutely not take away from the brilliant job that Ocon did yesterday. It was a really commanding performance. And although I can't put my hand on my heart and say I think this is the first of many for Ocon, I do think that he couldn't have handled his big moment any better.
And also, of course, it wasn't just Ocon who had a great drive. It was his teammate in the same car, who, let's be honest, if it wasn't for Fernando Alonso, Lewis Hamilton probably would have won that race. He defended, like his life depended on it. It was one of the best drives we've seen from Alonso for a very long time. Obviously, he's not had the car to be able to be doing those kind of drives, but still, it was a fantastic piece of defending for however many laps that he was holding Lewis Hamilton up. There's history between Alonso and Hamilton in Hungary as well. It was there where he held Hamilton up in the pit lanes when they were teammates in 2007. And Alonso will take this as a big win, I think, for him. I've always, as great as a driver as he is, I've always seen him as quite a petty driver. I think 2007 sums that up. So even though Lewis finished ahead of him in the end, that performance that Alonso put in, that level of defending, Alonso will take that as a big win for himself and Alpine.
Yes, and he said as much at the end, didn't he? He said it was important for Max and the championship that I held up Hamilton, which fair enough. But whatever his motivations for doing it, it was just a pleasure to watch that duel. Always going to get round the ducking and the weaving and the blocking and the kind of wheel-to-wheel racing I don't think we've seen in at least 10 years, if not probably more like 15 or 20. It was really reminiscent of something in the early 90s with the cars looking up the inside and then switching to the outside and having a go and not making it. Brilliant. Like what a sensational end to an already pretty interesting race.
And I think that's an important point that you bring up there, because we haven't really had that kind of stuff since before the DRS era, really. We see it every now and then, but not like we saw there. This was the kind of a battle from the days of old. Like you said, actually, when you messaged me when we were watching it, it wasn't quite Dijon with Villeneuve and Arnoux, with that kind of back and forth the whole time. But it was certainly like really, really enjoyable to watch. And I think that does bring up a question still of this artificial overtaking that we have potentially kind of been having for the last however long it's been now, nearly 10 years, I suppose. And that's one thing that I always thought was against DRS, was that in the old days when you used to watch Formula One, it wasn't the passing, it wasn't necessarily the overtaking that was always the most exciting thing. It was the catching up, and then how are they going to get past? The problem we have with today's cars is that they can't follow each other for very long. So you need that DRS. But there have been times in the past where cars have been able to follow each other without destroying their tires. And it was that back and forth that really was incredibly exciting. And we had a bit of that today, which I loved it. I loved watching it. Obviously loved the entire Grand Prix. And Alonso held up Hamilton so much that Hamilton was not going to win. He probably, I think, would have won. When he got past Alonso, his pace was incredible. And if he'd done it even a few laps earlier, he would have probably taken the win. But it was still a very, very good drive from Lewis, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was fantastic. If it hadn't been for a stroke of genius from maybe the only man on the track who could have done what he did, he'd have won. He would have. You saw how quickly he got past Sainz. He was very nearly past Vettel in the end. And once he was past Vettel, he'd have had Ocon as well. And we'd have been denied that particular interesting ending. But the luck that Lewis Hamilton has had in the last couple of races is insane. Like, I cannot believe how fortunate he's been with Verstappen effectively double DNFing, with a lack of severe issues himself when everybody else is under fire, and the ability to swing from what was looking like a long way behind. I honestly thought after Austria that Hamilton had lost the championship. I think we talked about that, didn't we, in previous episodes, how this was clearly Verstappen's year. And now all of a sudden we're into the summer break and Mercedes and Hamilton are back on top and looking the faster cars, it has to be said. They seem to have somewhat repaired that deficit they had at the start of the season. And Spa is going to be, you'd have thought, an ideal circuit for Mercedes. So will we come out of the summer break really raring on all cylinders at Mercedes, or are we going to be treated to more of a close fight once again, I wonder?
It's one of the things that I love about this season is that you're right, Verstappen has looked in total control. Before the British Grand Prix, he was in total control. The Red Bulls were miles ahead of Mercedes. And then the luck that came about, I think for me, was when him and Verstappen came together at Copse Corner. I still think it's a racing incident. You could, maybe the penalty for Lewis was fair enough. I'll take that, but I still don't think that there was necessarily a huge amount of blame to be put on either driver. It's a racing incident. But those kind of accidents, 99 times out of 100, Lewis Hamilton's front left wheel, the suspension will break, the wheel will come off, he'll get at least a puncture, something will happen to potentially cause a retirement, and it didn't. And then you've got today, this race where you had Valtteri Bottas ploughing into his closest championship rival and taking him out and giving Lewis as many points as he could. It was only a terrible strategic call that caused Lewis to have to fight his way back through the field. We had this really bizarre incident where we had a restart to the race and Lewis was the only one on the grid, which I don't think we've ever really seen before. And so there is that kind of element of luck in there, but I don't think that takes anything away from his performances in both of the last two races. They've been spectacular to get those points that he needed. And also, you know, I think it doesn't take anything away from the fact that Mercedes have improved as well. Let's talk about the crash. Personally, I thought that was really poor driving from Bottas. Drivers are going to make mistakes. It happens. And in wet conditions, it's even more likely to happen. But you don't tend to expect it from, I know Bottas is having a terrible season, so, you know, maybe you do expect it more from him now, but I don't expect that from basically Formula One's number 2, number 3 driver.
No, I mean, you don't. I think he was spooked by the poor start and trying to late brake. And also, I think that Norris cutting in to overtake, because Norris was probably going to come out of that corner second, I think, if he hadn't been hit, just compounded the situation. I saw a rare sane discussion on Reddit, suggesting that the only way it could have been really solved is if Norris had a moment of brilliant insight that doing this would likely cause Bottas, who would already be thinking of braking late, to hit him. So how do you avoid that, really? It was unfortunate. And it was just hugely, hugely lucky for Hamilton that what it did was take every front runner but him out of the race. I don't think there's much you can say, is there? He's been punished for it. You had the separate little incident with Stroll and Leclerc, which was, I think, the icing on the cake for moving that other Ferrari and the other Aston Martin, which is a shame because I think both of those would have fancied themselves to the big points had they not been involved in that little tangle. Ricciardo got caught up in it as well. But obviously the real damage was to the barge board on the side of the Red Bull. And even though Verstappen managed to go on quite valiantly, I think it was pretty clear when we knew they couldn't reattach the barge boards that it was going to be the end of his race at that point, which is a shame because I was looking forward to a great wheel-to-wheel battle. But what we happened to get, I think, was even better. It was nice to see some new cars in the mix. A 12th race winner on the grid now. Yeah, brilliant, really brilliant.
And you're right. Verstappen basically had as much damage that you are legally allowed to drive on with in his car, to be honest. I mean, everything that was hanging off got pulled off. And because the barge board is basically somewhere you can sort of hit without causing too much damage to the overall car, but obviously the performance is severely wounded. And he was, I think I was actually sort of expecting him to go through the field, sort of like Lewis was really, but unfortunately he just did not have any pace at all, did he? And it was a real shame. But you're right, we got a spectacular race because of that incident. Let's talk about Mercedes strategy calls. I've mentioned it earlier because they had a terrible call in this race and a masterstroke in one race, which is incredible because Mercedes have not, I would say they've not been on their game this year like they have in the last 7-8 years. When it comes to strategic calls, they've made mistakes which has cost them points. But this strategy call where they brought Lewis Hamilton in to perform the undercut on Max Verstappen to get him in front, and then for him to be released was genius.
Yes, yeah. I don't understand how they could get it so wrong and so right at the same time, really. But they did, and that second call really changed Hamilton's race. I thought, oh no, they fluffed here, and he came in and he pitted and he was miles behind and he was like, I can't get round. I'm stuck in 14th. But then the pit stop changed everything, and then it just became full hammer time, didn't it? We were texting as he came out of the pits, and we both knew that was the moment he was going to go flying off, which he did.
And I think as well, the first stop that he made with the undercut on Verstappen, turns out that actually it probably didn't matter too much because Verstappen never really had the pace, but it did show how strong the undercut was. I personally thought they brought Hamilton in quite early, and I'm not sure they were expecting Red Bull necessarily to react immediately, which they did the next lap, but he still got out in front. And then, of course, pitting him in to get him on those medium tyres to just fly at the top 4 places. So it's funny how I think confidence can do a lot for you, because I think this Mercedes team now have got a bit of their mojo back. When you have that confidence in your team, you rarely make mistakes. You look at, we always compare Mercedes usually to the Ferrari era, because they were the last truly dominant era. I know that Red Bull had a long spell at the top, but I would say that Ferrari's was potentially stronger. But it was, Ferrari were well known, or Ross Brawn and Jean Todt especially, were well known for their incredible strategy calls to get Schumacher in front, whether it was using Barrichello for whatever reason, whether it was using an undercut or anything like that. So that's why we usually compare it. And when one thing goes right for you and you build up that confidence, you just so rarely make a mistake. So rarely. And Mercedes have had that up until this season when they've been rattled by Red Bull. But now, potentially, they've got the confidence back. And if they can keep it going to the end of the season, it will certainly put them in a really good position.
Yes, and I think as much as Mercedes are a confidence team, Hamilton is a confidence driver. And once he feels like he's in the zone, he is absolutely away. And yeah, I think we're seeing that now, really. I think it's how he's managed to claw back the title deficit and begin to get himself back to the very top where he wants to be. I know he would have liked those extra points for winning, but second, third, still not bad when your title rival has only managed to score 2 that race and none the race before. So excellent, really. Like, I just can't believe that we've gone into the summer break looking like this, despite dodgy strategy calls, despite having to get raced from the back, despite contentious incidents. Here's Hamilton back out on top. It is unlucky for Verstappen, but championships are made and lost on luck to an extent anyway, aren't they? If he doesn't get the title this year, he will not be the first driver to lose it through unluckiness. It's inevitable. There is a Verstappen title coming, if not this year, then surely the year after. We can fully expect that now. But just the whole race, the entire weekend really has had me lost for words. It was better than the British Grand Prix, which was still quite exciting. And it was definitely better than that little period of Red Bull dominance we had, which I think was just the same as the Mercedes dominance, but a different car winning.
And you're right, there is that element of luck. And I always say Hamilton would be an 8-time world champion by now if his engine hadn't have blown up in Malaysia in 2016. If it hadn't, and this was a Mercedes engine, it never broke down. He would have won in Malaysia. He was so far ahead, and he would have been in the lead of the championship going into Abu Dhabi, and he would have won the championship. And it's those fine lines that just cost you things here and there. Unfortunately for Verstappen, it was the fact that it was his title rival that he drove. That they both collided in Silverstone. Let's talk about some of the other important things in that race then, because there were some. Because of the mix-up of the order and the grid and the accident that happened, there was some quite surprising finishes in and around the points as well, not just the first place position. So Sebastian Vettel came second initially. It looked like he had actually was on for the race win at one point. He just couldn't quite get past Ocon, and as we've spoken about already, Ocon defended really well. Aston Martin seem to be similarly inconsistent, but maybe are just starting to push on with their car and getting better. As of this moment, the final results that are in say that Vettel has been disqualified from the race. So he didn't get any points, but on the day he finished in second. So it was a very good drive for him and very unfortunate that he's not going to pick up those points.
Yes, yeah, it is. But fair play to Aston Martin, actually. They've also improved quite a lot this season. They were the disappointment at the start of the year, weren't they? Let's not pretend that we didn't, as everybody, I think, have high hopes for Aston Martin. But as the season's gone on, they've just started to pick up. We had that second place in Azerbaijan, and Stroll's been relatively, embarrassing first contract side, relatively consistent throughout the season. Obviously, huge blow for them, Alpine doing well, because Alpine was their closest title rival. But hopefully, come the Circuit of the Americas, come Mexico, they should have improved themselves to the point as well where they're really beginning to mix it up a bit more. And obviously, if Vettel is reinstated, big boost for them. But I was impressed by both cars' actually ability to stay ahead of that Ferrari, even if they were getting caught very rapidly by the Mercedes at the end.
Yeah, it seems that they are getting better slowly but surely. I think we're all surprised because essentially it's just a repackaged Racing Point, and the Racing Point was so good last year that we were sort of thinking, well, they just carry that on, just carry over whatever you were doing. But obviously there were some changes to the regulations that seem to have affected them more than other cars. But people were talking about that last year as well. So you're right. I think you had them down to finish third in the constructors this year. I had them down to finish fourth. So we had high expect. I think they're sixth at the moment.
Seventh.
I remember. In fact, they're seventh. They're behind the AlphaTauris. So, and obviously Alpine picked up loads of points this weekend. So they've got a lot of work to do still, I think. I hope that this is just a teething year. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say this is a new team. It's not, but I'm going to give them the benefit of that and say it is. With a new driver in Sebastian Vettel, very experienced, but still new to the team. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt with that, and I hope that next season they will learn from whatever has happened this season and they'll improve. Let's talk about Williams then, because Williams picked up some points, and based on the fact that Sebastian Vettel has lost his second place, Latifi finished seventh, Russell finished eighth. They picked up 10 points together as a team. But the huge irony in all of this is that throughout the entire season, it's all been about George Russell. George Russell outperforming all expectations, looking like he was going to be the one to pick up points. And on the day he does pick up his race points, Latifi beats him.
I'd be mad, but I'm just glad they both scored. The first double points finish, I think, in 4 years for Williams. The first points finish in 2.5. Fantastic. It wasn't so long ago, of course, that Bottas took them to third in the championship. But those days that felt like a very long time ago. And coming off the back of such a disappointing period, how brilliant it was. And obligatory congratulations to Russell for the way that he radioed the team, said, I'm the supporting role here, compromise my race, make sure he brings the points home. And yeah, they managed to cement 7th, 8th, maybe 9th to be certified. But a fantastic team performance and just nice to see them do well. I mean, I don't know how much more we can say because they've been so anonymous for so long. The Williams family have sold, Dorilton Capital have come in, they've changed CEO already in that time, but it's worked, and you can't help but feel there are maybe more points in it for them this season. They are so there or thereabout. It's this close, and with the monkey off both of their backs having scored their first points, will they now be able to push on and really make that difference? Is the weight lifted?
That's the thing. It's them finally just getting over that hump, isn't it? And now they have that weight off their shoulders, they can kick on, and they are making themselves stand out as the best of the back markers, essentially, and pushing for that midfield. I still think that breaking into that midfield is a way away, especially this season. But the fact that George Russell is always more, other than this weekend, ironically, is more or less in contention for a top 10 qualifying place, like every weekend, just shows you that they're really pushing, or certainly George Russell is. But I do want to give a big shout out to Latifi, because I thought he drove fantastically well today. Has he ever been up that high? I don't think he has. I don't think he's been under that much pressure in a race. I don't think he's been up in the points since his time in Formula One. And he held his nerve and he held his positions. Like, he just kept going and got a really solid finish. We have this idea that George Russell is a potential world champion in the coming years. Russell could not catch him and overtake him. I know that Russell was told to give some places back or whatever, but Latifi stayed in front of him the whole time. And they worked together in this as well. I know George did come over the radio, to be fair to him, and say, like, anything I can do to help Latifi's race, then tell me, which was very noble. But he wants points for the team. And obviously, but we saw how emotional it was for him at the end of that race to pick up those points. But Latifi, I thought, especially after what happened, I do think this is a little bit of a nothing story, to be honest, Chris. But what Dan Ticktum said about him, and the fact that he was quite rude about Latifi, and considering that, I mean, it was a really stupid thing to say, considering that you want that seat and now you're just kind of like saying nasty things about somebody who's in that position. I think that there was a little bit of redemption this weekend for Latifi, and I'm really pleased for him because he deserves it.
Yeah, no, he does. I think he actually, for all the flash that goes to Russell, he would have finished ahead of Russell last year had Russell not had that drive in the Mercedes. And he was looking the more consistent driver. He's had his share of nearly point scores that have gone unnoticed this year as well. And yeah, just to see him do well, look confident, look good. I hope he can have another stab at the season next year, and I hope that he does it in a more competitive car with the knowledge that he is a Formula One point scorer.
Absolutely. And another very important point, we've got other bits and pieces that I do want to bring up later on, but another, I think, very important part of this race is that we saw a little bit of Mick Schumacher's potential today in the race.
Yes, finally. I've wondered, Schumacher, now he's in a terrible car, isn't he? He is in a pretty objectively terrible machine, but I've still not particularly been impressed by him. He's been better than Mazepin, but Mazepin couldn't drive the car at the start of the season. So you'd really hope that he was better than Mazepin. But you saw for the first time, I think, a real flash of ability, didn't you? He was causing trouble. Whether the Red Bull was damaged or not, he was covering off excellently and safely. You never really got the feeling at any point that he was out of control or overdoing the defense. He was very clean. He was very assured in his movements. And I thought, wow, do you know what? I can actually see something here at last. Which, again, to qualify, isn't that I thought he should have been getting into Q3 and a half, because I think qualifying above about 16th is probably a physical impossibility in that car. It's last year's car, and last year's car was useless anyway. I think the real issue is he's just looked as crashy and uncertain as his teammate. And given that his teammate comes with a particularly low record, which at least will be improved by the fact that Jihan Daruvula is in a young driver's test for Formula One teams this week, to see him look like an accomplished racer was just nice. It was one of the pleasant surprises of the race, along with Ocon winning.
And I think that Schumacher's had more crashes than Mazepin this year in terms of damaging the car. Mazepin's had a few more spins potentially, but Schumacher's tends to make contact with the wall when he goes off. But this time he he really did show his class. I think it takes a lot of guts to go up against Max Verstappen side by side on a racetrack. A lot more experienced drivers than him have caved under that pressure. And like you said, when you have a fairly inexperienced driver who's finds himself in a sudden battle that they didn't realize they didn't think they'd be in, they tend to panic and they tend to make some mistakes. And he didn't. He was just in a far worse car. So just good showing from Schumacher. And I really hope that we see more of him in the future. I hope he gets out of that Haas team as soon as he can and get into a decent car. And maybe we'll see him actually battling more on track. So some key important things to mention about the race. Nothing too major that we need to focus on too much, but some important things to pick up on. Sainz had a really good race, went off in qualifying, so had a poor qualifying and then regained. And because of Vettel's penalty, he ended up finishing on the podium, which was great. And also Daniel Ricciardo, after getting caught up in the collision in the first corner as well, had a very good, I say very good, he had a decent comeback. I wouldn't say very good because he didn't actually finish in the points in the end, but he still, fought back to keep going and to actually finish the race. So some important things to pick up on there.
Yes, yeah, there are. It's a very strange sort of race, isn't it? Because there was one big talking point at lap one, and then the rest of it is just us picking at these little threads. I don't know which particular thread to pick at, really. We saw another good drive from Pierre Gasly. I do think that was one of my takeaways from this race. 5th place, he's just continuing to look good in that AlphaTauri. His teammate did very well in 6th as well, looked much more assured. He's another driver, I think, who's looking better as the season goes on. He's been a bit all over the place, but he's beginning to find some consistency now. He's had 4 points finishes in the last 6 races, and I mean, he made the most of the lack of anything, didn't he? Lack of competition this week. Daniel Ricciardo, as you said, ultimately finished up the points, but did recover. I don't know what to say about him now, because it's got to the point where you do just want to see him do well, so you could be like, oh, it's worked, thank goodness for that. But whether bad luck intervenes or whether he just doesn't pull it together that weekend, it's beginning to look like we're going to be asking questions about what's happening with that second McLaren seat, because his teammate is 3rd in the championship. He's ahead of a Mercedes and a Red Bull which has a race winner from this season sat in it, no less, as awful as Bottas's luck has been. And yeah, I would personally wonder if Gasly continues to look good and Red Bull aren't looking like having him back, if Pierre Gasly might not be beginning to think, is that a bit summer silly season to say Gasly to Mercedes 2023? McLaren. Gasly to McLaren. Mercedes was silly season.
No, I'm glad you brought it up, because I think I've brought up Gasly in almost every podcast that we've done this season, certainly after the first couple of races, because I think he's been the most impressive driver this season. I love watching him drive. I think he's so consistent. I think he's incredibly strong. I think he's brave in passing and defending as well. And I really like that. I do think that we're now past the point, though, of saying he's out driving that AlphaTauri. I think that we need to accept that the AlphaTauri is a very good car this season, but he is still performing. He's driving that car to its limits, to the best that he can. And I think he's putting himself right in the shop window for a team. When Ricciardo inevitably gives up on this McLaren dream that he has, which I think if it continues on this season, I think that's very likely that might happen, then they'll be looking at Gasly, who will still be young. He won't be, I don't think he'll be anywhere near 30 when it gets to 2023. I think he'll be about 25, 26 maybe. He'll be potentially peaking. And that's a great time for McLaren to pick up Gasly. Hopefully McLaren continues.
27.
So he'll be 27. That's if you look at Hamilton and Alonso and Raikkonen, I think, and Vettel, I think he's got a good shout of being in Formula One for another 10, 15 years. So if he keeps going as he is. So I would love to see him in that McLaren seat, personally. I think he deserves another chance at a top team. I've made my thoughts very clear on how I think he was unfairly treated at Red Bull. And I think if he keeps doing what he's doing, just keep on smashing out those points finishes, he's well in with a shout of getting a top drive. Not next year, probably, but the year after.
Yeah, I think that's one to discuss when we've seen him complete this season. But he really is, after Norris, looking like the king of the midfield, isn't he? That win in Monza last year has really done him the power of good. He's finally been able to open up, and he's really spreading his wings and looking absolutely fabulous.
But the final point I want to make before we finish off the podcast, Chris, is about the Hungarian. Because it's been on the calendar for a very long time now. I think over 35 years nearly, or something like that. It's been on the calendar for, and it's notorious for very difficult overtaking. It has had some fantastic races over the years, but it's one that the drivers, especially in the modern era, have struggled to overtake on. I'm not sure if it was ever under threat. I don't think it was ever under threat of being dropped from the calendar, or certainly not yet. I don't think it's got any financial issues with its contract or any issues that we often see. Every year we hear about, Silverstone and Monza, not getting renewed. I don't think it's ever necessarily been in that kind of danger. But did this race save its place in the calendar?
In my heart, yes. I think before the race it re-signed like a 15-year deal, like a ludicrously long deal. But I always thought, oh God, it's Hungary. What a boring race. Why do we bother going there? And now I think, fantastic. We really saw there was some overtaking to be had at that track. It looked like a good test of the driver's skill. It presented 4 or 5 decent corners where drivers could get round each other rather than just the dive into turn 1 that we just see endlessly at the moment in other races. I think that it's just changed my view on how these tracks can be. And I really hope with the increased following and passing ideas trying to be brought in next year, it will continue to be that exciting, because I think that Hungary 2021 is one of the races or will go down as one of the races of the decade. One of those really brilliant, exciting, unpredictable races where anything could happen. We had an unexpected win. You wouldn't even have guessed. Who would have thought that Esteban Ocon was going to win that race, dominate that race, no less, and finish ahead of Sebastian Vettel in a car that's looked pretty useless all year. So while the race's place might have been safe, I think fans are going to look forward to it now in a way that they never did before. Well, I hope anyway.
Well, that's the thing. I'm really hoping that next year we're actually going to see some of these tracks where you go, ugh, before they appear on the calendar. For me, Paul Ricard comes to mind with a race in France, and just sort of thinking, are we really just going to sit through all of this again? But hopefully those dull tracks will be turned into exciting ones, and we get to see some racing that we've been seeing all season. And that wraps it up for us. Thank you so much for listening. We have really enjoyed doing these podcasts for the first half of the season. We've still got another half to come, but obviously Formula One is going on its summer break now. Eau Rouge Podcast is still going to have some content over the summer, which we'll keep producing and keep you entertained right up until the next race in Spa. But thank you so much for listening. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you all very, very soon.